So thanks to many conversations I had, first of all, I'm very happy and glad to be here. It's a great event, great conversation, and because of that, I had to kind of literally redo a presentation this morning. So there's two things that are sure, is there will be very deep thoughts on AI, but there will be also a lot of typos, so be gentle with me. Let's see if this works. Almost. Ready? Okay, cool. No bugs. So, basically, there's one thing we need to remember from this decade is we are entering a non-deterministic decade. And maybe I should talk like this. For those who don't really understand what I mean by that is that we're moving from a world based on man-made algorithms, and a deterministic model is a model where every time the input is the same, the result is the same. When the computer doesn't do what you want, it's usually what we call a bug. It can be a man-made error, it can be technical glitch, but it is intended to do the things the way it should. Now we're entering models, and models that are either pre-trained, so we teach, or let the machine teach itself things. And soon we will be in a world where the machine learns the things by itself. It will speak a new language, and you would wonder, like, why is it this? And we don't know, it learned it. There's one thing that is fascinating about the current trend in AI is that if you're really serious with anyone who built these things, that you ask them a question, so what's new, how does it work, why is it working so well? They usually come with the same answer. We don't really know. So we're entering basically a world where we're just bringing code, all the code ever written, available on GitHub has been put there. Culture, it's a very large word. It could mean a lot of videos of cats on YouTube, of course. And the entire literature. And one of the reasons is that there's a Russian hacking site called LibGen that has a digital copy of the entire publication in PDF and EPUBs. And if you ask the large company, did you guys use that model? They would probably say, we don't want to answer, but it's probably what they did. And now we basically prompt, and it gives us something. And that's the new world we live in. And I guess the question we should, and we will in the second part discuss is this better for the world? And if you think about it, if you try to look at the bigger picture, the question, it was an incredible article in the New Yorker about, how LLMs are the equivalent of what MP3s are to music. MP3s using what we call a destructive compression, and you remove information, but when you play it back, your ears, actually it's not true, because if you listen to a vinyl and an MP3, one of them is completely crap. But we accepted to live in a world where the audio quality is lower. And right now we live, and especially here, we're in a library, we live in a world with archivists, people who basically collect the data in full content, the full form. That's also true in companies and enterprise, they say, a lot of people talk about, are we going to replace knowledge management with an AI? That's the number one thing right now that everybody, including Microsoft and Google, are trying to sell. It means that we're going to take all the expertise you have in books, but also the expertise that each individual person has, and we're going to replace it with corporate models. So if you think about it, in a few decades, maybe we'll have only access to a compressed version of all the human knowledge. So we're basically in kind of race for to synthetic content. We have on one side what I call the analog world, also refer to the analog internet, meaning the internet that existed before AI, that is actually tied to some form of reality. You know, the MP3s of music you bought, they are in digital form, books, photos you took on your phone that are tied to the reality. And now there's going to be a new synthetic world, designed and created by the process we described earlier. And in this analog world, by the way, the truth, especially now that we live in a world of social media, is one part of this. It's not the entire world today, thanks to social media. So what seems to be a smaller production of content generated by AI, but for example, in the press, AI content, generated content is not new. It's been here forever. Now, some people talk about an estimation 80% of the content is available is either AI or farm generated, means complete non-human created. It doesn't mean it was made with ChatGPT because they had other ways to build content in the past, but like a majority of the web is crap right now. And when you type on Google, you used to have the number one search result was what you wanted. Now the thing you want is maybe in page 3 or 4, knowing that half of the first page is advertising. It's kind of an interesting way to think about how the internet worked. But there's going to be a moment, and I think the blue bubble here could be way bigger, where suddenly what used to be the analog world is going to be captured in this ever-growing and growing synthetic content world. And if you remember the truth, suddenly we could think about this idea that researching the truth is like, you know, remember when we were archaeologists trying to figure out, I'm always amazed by the Bronze Age, because if you go to the Louvre and you see all these little things, that's always left of that era. And I wonder if at some point, speculation, but is kind of close to the truth, if we start generating so much content that is fake, how do we do, or I wouldn't say fake, I'm going to say synthetic, because fake has a different thing. I think fake has an intent. Synthetic means generated by a non-human. And researching the truth is going to be the work of archaeologists. I always make a joke about myself, because I should have probably started with this. I've been known as being a tech entrepreneur, but also I used to be a journalist. But at the moment, I feel of myself of a pre-internet computer archaeologist. I'm interested in what was the world of technology and online before 1993, when the internet became, you know, the focal point of everything. And so sometimes I joke by saying I'm a tech archaeologist. But at some point, some people will become the true archaeologist. So the question is, we could ask ourselves, is how creative is this new era? And let's take it like a traditional Gaussian curve. You're going to use ChatGPT. I guess everybody here has used either ChatGPT or Midjourney, so I don't need to go through this. But you know, sometimes you want to type something and the result is kind of not so great, dumbed down. That's not good for the machine, because if it's not good, you're like, this is BS, I don't want to use this. If the content is too crazy, you know, we all talked about hallucinations, and it's suddenly the machines start either faking new things, being very enthusiastic about things, too assertive. I mean, some response can be like, okay, this is way not usable. Example, if you're a lawyer and you start asking the machine and it gives you completely fake case or files or completely reinvention of the law, doesn't work. So basically, the sweet spot is in the middle. This is what ChatGPT, by the way, ChatGPT is not an LLM. ChatGPT is a combination of software that have been assembled to make sure that the majority of the response are in the sweet spot. Because the sweet spot is where is the money. If a non-deterministic system sounds like a deterministic system, meaning that you have an expected answer, you're asking a prompt, and the results look like, oh, this is something I should have wrote if I had like 2 hours and I just have 10 minutes to go and see my boss because I forgot about this report I have to send in 10 minutes, right? If it works all the time, then this is the jackpot. This is what, by the way, most of these companies, when they refer to AGI, they don't talk about the Terminator. They're talking about the digital intern, this thing that you have with you that will do all these tasks. And hopefully, if it's here in the middle, reliable. But that part is very, what we usually call enhanced conformism. It's very standard. It's nothing great, nothing amazing, nothing too dumb. It's just in the middle. Just what you expect in some ways in a corporate world, you know. Just why would I be blamed when I actually wrote exactly what my boss wanted me to write? Plus, by the way, I didn't write it, so it's even better. And if you think about the creative side, it should be more on the crazy side. So when you think about it, right now, all this software that is basically designed initially for artists has been retargeted for like conformism and the mid-size. But the funny part, the part where it's exciting, the part where the unexpected might happen, is more here. And this is a very important thing to remember about AI, is that AI picks statistical patterns. It's about pattern detection. And AI is conservative by design. It's about learning about the old world and rehashing it. Nothing really new, just, and you can see that because if you look at Midjourney, most people, I mean, I go on all these groups on Facebook to look at what's been done, and it's about 150 artists. Of course, if you don't know any name of artist, it's a problem. Now, there's a lot of people talking about an artist, but I don't actually even know the artist. They haven't even seen his work, but it looks cool, so I'm going to type its name. And 100 prompts, you know, you have all this like little sentence you put on the prompt, and suddenly it makes the whole thing looks great, like hyperrealism or 4K, 8K, all of this that, by the way, Midjourney has kind of removed because they knew it was also basically rehashing the same design or iteration of the same design over and over and over. And at some point, it's like Matrix, you know, the prompt, the Matrix, the first one was so amazing. It looked unbelievable. But then our brain adapt. So when they did the second one, they thought, we're going to do this very long fight scenes with all the same effect, a little bit better. And it felt really boring because our brain had already adapted to that kind of things. And we want something different. We don't want more of the same. And in some ways, we kind of see that now with Midjourney because a lot of the content is kind of always the same, always, especially if you're in the sci-fi thing. At first it felt a little bit interesting, and now it's kind of pretty much the same thing. I would say, and that's a conversation I had with Kevin, is good artists actually run their own models, because if you work on a corporate model, at the end of the day, you get corporate results or very low interest results. So, what is the long-term effect of AI? And this is an interesting question because the first generation of AI, you know, the history of AI is kind of three different things. First generation was symbolics. In the 50s until the 80s, I was partially trained on this. A lot of my dad's friends in university were actually pioneers of that field. And in the US, MIT, Marvin Minsky and all these guys, John McCarthy mostly. And symbolic was interesting because the idea of, you know, we're gonna code the intelligence, we're gonna mark it, we're gonna give it a markup. And then we discovered that maybe humans are not good at coding their own intelligence or their own version of intelligence. So we went to machine learning. Machine learning was terrible for years, and then suddenly it worked. And by the way, there's only one reason it worked. Not because they were better algorithms, because they were better training models. It's because we had so much data because of the internet. And suddenly the computing available was so intense that things that didn't work suddenly work. And most people would tell you, we still don't know. Mark Zuckerberg just announced they're going to have a 350,000 H100 chips, you know, the NVIDIA chips we use for training model, $20,000, $25,000 a piece, plus all the stuff he bought like from years before. You remember when they were going to do the metaverse? Thanks for him, all the machines can be repurposed for AI. But so why are they doing this? And why is Google doing the same thing? Is why OpenAI is doing the same thing thanks to Microsoft? It's because they all understand that throw more data as you can, throw more computing power as you can, and then you get eventually one day AGI. So the second generation of machine learning started through a discovery at Google, was used by OpenAI, and OpenAI had found some interesting discovery that was used by Midjourney, so you can see that there's a lot of things happening. But the first generation of machine learning was actually implemented in social media, you know. Why is YouTube and TikTok and all these things so good at finding what I want? It's because they're learning your pattern, literally like a brain. And, oh, sorry about this. And during that time, the relation to truth, and by the way, truth itself, was the principal victim of social media, as we all have seen what happened over the last decade, and especially in politics. And the question I wonder is, it's about what will be the next victim of generative AI? And my bet is that it's going to be our relation to memory. And I'd like to show you, if it works, this video. Let me see if I can make it happen, because for some reason this thing sometimes doesn't work the way it should. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Playback, loop. Let's see if I reload. So this is, by the way, a small video. I hope it will work. Okay. I should have not pressed reload. We'll see how fast the internet will get. Sorry about this. So anyway, why memory? It's what is absolutely fascinating is this. I'll just, while this thing goes down. This thing cost, this is an iPhone 15. I had to buy one because I had not updated for 3 years. And when I was early in my time of, I was mostly buying every version of the iPhone. And when the iPhone 12 kind of appeared, I was like, why do I care? The camera is the same, the device is the same. And now with AI, I can, you know, simulate new, basically improve the quality of the picture, so it doesn't make any sense. And when it said it's 50 megapixel or something like that, that means that this is only good for Photoshop users. And this is a basic question that every of these manufacturers is asking itself, is how can we sell expensive phones? Not how can we sell phones, it's how can we sell expensive phones? And obviously one of the reasons is AI. Let me see if this thing goes again this time. Sometimes takes a little, the video is a little bit big. It's probably why. I'm gonna wait. It's gonna take a little time. And this is a big question for all of them because they know we're in the end of a cycle. We're like basically probably entering a post-mobile world, meaning a world where the differentiation of device doesn't exist. And so when we're talking about AI, is the dream of all these manufacturers, I imagine, is to install an LLM. That probably what is Apple will do, and then 1 or 2 or 3 iterations, and allow you to have your personal AI device. But the question I'm wondering is it going to be a personal corporate device, or is it going to be a personal device? And there's a very big difference, because of course, the way we train an LLM to ourselves is very different from the way someone else would, and the same way that our personalities are different. And I'm kind of wondering, because this is going to be the next 10 years of fight. Okay, let me see if I can fix this or not. Sorry about this. And that's the last. Okay, I'm sorry. So while this thing comes in, I had this provocative title of, indigenous. Are we becoming the new indigenous? And is AI basically flooding the world with so much content that we, not only so much content, but the reflection of that content is an oversimplification of who we are. And I'm always afraid of this idea that we're moving from a very complex world to something that is going to be extremely black and white, very simple world, simple narrative. And in many ways, we're doing basically the same things that we did in the past. We're destroying our own history by eliminating the truth, eliminating the content, eliminating not by physically destroying, even if that can be debated, because a lot of, the archive of the world are basically run by a non-profit foundation, archive.org. There's not a lot of companies and not a lot of government that are spending, I don't know how it is here in Turkey, but in any country, there should be a preservation of, the internet culture, and I'm not sure it's done everywhere. And also, and this is an important thing for me, the loss of our cognitive autonomy, so the ability to think by ourselves. The same way that phones and Facebook, I don't remember any phone numbers. You gave me a number, I don't even think about remembering it. Why? Because it's on my phone. One of the greatest gifts we had at school was the ability to summarize or to do an essay. The essay is fascinating for one reason. Doesn't matter the subject, doesn't matter anything. What matters is that we've been trained for a couple hours to have a white page, a question. What do I think about this? And how do I put it together? This is a superpower. If you replace that by, I'm going to ask the question to GPT, and it may give me 10 different versions, and I will pick one. This is a different form. And it means that our ability to think, to summarize, things as easy as summarizing, putting in context, thinking through, if you delegate that to the machine, what are the long-term effects of that for us? And we know how lazy we are. I mean, part of the tech industry has been designed around our laziness, I just want to go out. You go out here and you just take your phone and Uber or Deliveroo or Google or anything, we just, and now it feels like more of it will actually go, and our basic cognitive ability may be put out. And the last thing is, sorry, I'm going to get through this, and unfortunately, we are basically entering also entering a form of cognitive capitalism. This is default model. It means that we're going to pay to think. If you think about the idea, what people say, oh, OpenAI is great, it's only $20 a month. And it can do translation, it can do summarize, it can do understanding of long PDF that you don't have time to do, it can generate pictures, it can generate fonts, it can generate anything you need for your daily work. Some of the things, to be honest, are the things we don't. If you're not a designer, maybe that I'm probably with the wrong crowd here, but you know what I mean? You could say there's a benefit to it, but suddenly if you think about the fact that you have to pay to think, it's kind of a very, very, very scary thing, especially the moment you don't have enough money to pay. What do you become when, or if you pay more, you think better? I mean, it feels very weird because we are at the very early premise of a world Because of course, we've seen that with Google and we've seen that with social media. If the product is free, it means that it's basically shit. And the quality is very bad in the long term. At first it's very shiny and then you have an old car that barely starts. So I'm afraid that, you know, AI start with like this very cool stuff, and then it's gonna include advertising, or it's gonna bring cognitive surrounding, the idea that, you know, if you type any political or any social question, suddenly the summary is very oriented in a way. So you don't have a global understanding. When we lose the ability of, you know, it doesn't matter what you think. And I would say I was happy to argue, but you want to think by yourself and know why you are on that side or that side. And that could blur with these tools. So this is a quite interesting situation. Sorry about that. I was going to try a last time if it goes. Because it was an, maybe. Dommage. It's sadly, let me see. I'm just going to do one quick thing and I'll be done with this. I'm going to find the master.
Using a combination of semantic understanding and generative AI, you can do much more with a new experience called Magic Editor. Let's have a look.
At the most recent Google Developer Conference, CEO Sundar Pichai announced a new tool for Google Photos called Magic Editor. A tool that goes beyond simple color correction, even beyond erasing unwanted people in the background. With Magic Editor, you can make fundamental changes to the photos you've taken using artificial intelligence. Around that same time, Adobe released a new tool for Photoshop called Generative Fill. For example, here's a photo that my wife took of me in Scotland last year with our dog Tungus, next to the lovely stone cottage that we stayed at for a couple of nights. Except the photo she took isn't really this big. I used Generative Fill to extend it out in all directions, and it did so seamlessly. And also, we didn't actually stay in a stone cottage. And this part is fake too, and so is this part. Oh, and we don't have a dog. And my boots were green. During the Google event, Marquez Brownlee of MKBHD tweeted simply, "What is a photo?" It's a good question. At one time, we thought of photography as a way to capture accurate representations of the world, a way to freeze time in snapshots that we could revisit to see what we look like in the past. With the arrival of camera phones and Instagram, simple editing tools and filters of all kinds, photography became less about the past and more about the present, a tool to present your preferred glamorized self to others and ultimately to yourself. You know, something Pichai said at that Google event has really stuck with me.
And maybe you want to even get rid of some clouds to make it feel as sunny as you remember.
There's so much going on in that sentence. It recognizes something universally true about human memory. It's inaccurate. It is always necessarily the case that memory distorts the past according to the needs of the present. Human beings are constantly making a narrative of their lives, writing.
Okay.
Of course, we want you to do more.
So that was it. I'm sure many of you have used these tools, but what is fascinating, and I will just conclude on that, is that every company, after basically giving us very personal tool to organize our lives, and I should have used the mic, sorry about this, for those in the back, now are basically trying to create a device to completely corrupt our lives and memories, and that's interesting thing. And I wonder if you as artists are in the only hope we have to actually reconnect us to the reality of our lives. Anyway, thanks so much. Sorry for being long and sorry for the video.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for everyone who joined us today. And Tariq, thank you so much for the presentation. I had so much that I wanted to ask Tariq, but I think with your presentation now, there's so much more that I need to ask you that we need to dive into. And one of the things that I realized, it was not in today's presentation, but in a recent presentation that Tariq had, he mentioned a concept that's called accelerated insanity. And that term really resonated with me. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that because I feel like, you know, when you said, how did we end up living in this era of accelerated insanity? We all probably feel that way, especially in the last year and more so in the last couple of months with the, you know, all the updates and developments of AI. So what I want to talk about, you know, on my end, I'm on the brand side, so I know the pressure that it creates on C-level agency and brand leaders, but today we're going to talk about the impact that it has on the society and culture. You mentioned in your presentation some of the dark areas, right, that we're going to talk about further, but what is like the number one thing that is basically the scariest for you in terms of its impact on our culture and society?
I think the scariest thing you talked about, the reason I was talking about acceleration of insanity is that most of the founders in the Valley, some of them, but I know actually personally, are not sociologists, anthropologists. They know nothing about social science. They know sometimes nothing about economics. They know nothing about culture. They know nothing about these things. These are people who took years of studies to actually learn these things. And suddenly we have people, because they did a great algorithm or they are a head of AI lab, suddenly talk about impact on society without even properly acknowledging what they're talking about. And I think this is one of the biggest problems we have to go against, is that sometimes if you create, you know, we've been through years of fake news. Number one problem in social media is, can we trust what is in the social media? And what does Instagram announce? There's a thing called backdrop and another app that will replace entirely the photo. So it means that weeks or months from now, every photo that is generated on Instagram may not be true. It means that you change the weather, as you've seen. This is fantastic, the quote of Sundar. I'm still thinking about it, you know. And the long-term consequence, or even the short-term consequence of what we're doing is a big problem, especially, you know, that this year is, in terms of election, half of the population in the world is actually voting, especially in the EU and the US, but also in many other places. And so allowing this kind of device and saying that we will double down on, you know, synthetic content in the year of election, I found it a little bit crazy. So I would say for me, the scariest thing is not the technology itself, it's the fact that some of the people building this technology think they have knowledge of how the society works, and they don't.
Wow, that's really interesting. And tied to that, you know, both in your presentation today, but also we had a side chat with Tariq the other day, and he really highlighted on the point of the impact that AI is going to have on our personal memories, like our day-to-day memories, and overall society's memory. So you had that in your presentation today as well. I want to go a little further into that. Like, do you have examples in your mind of like what that can look like for our personal memory and society's memory?
This is, I think the question of memory is not only an incredible subject, but if you go just in sci-fi, by example, I mean, if you read half of K. Dick books, they're all about this specific issue. And one thing that always fascinated me, because years ago in an art fair in Monaco, we had a conversation with a friend who's also a big Philip K. Dick fan, and we talked about this question is, are our dreams pretty much generated by algorithm? And if you think about our, you know, subconscious level, is basically a rehash of all the things we've seen during the day. A majority of what we've seen now is through our screens, and whatever is in our screen has been curated by an algorithm. So in some ways, we are now not only, you know, this big cybernetic monster that is what social media is, literally can have an effect not only in our everyday life, but also in our brain, in the way we think, by prioritizing things differently. There's been studies at Facebook, they're trying to put some depressing news to a subset of people and optimistic news, and guess what? If you depress people from the morning, they get depressed, but if you're depressed, we sell you different type of ads. You want to go travel and things like that. It's better when you're depressed. I really need a break. And if you're too happy and euphoric, then you need other things because you may be too happy and you're willing to pay for something more expensive because you think, I'm feeling so good. Oh, I'm going to get a new TV, a flat TV or thing like that. So it is very weird, but we forget that this little device not only control our emotion, our day-to-day life, but also our emotional levels. And the last thing I would say really about this is I remember having a conversation with people at Facebook about the idea of having a timeline, an historical view of our life on Facebook. And they tested this. They started profile years ago and then removed them. And I asked the person in charge that at Facebook, why did you do that? And he said, oh, it's very simple. If you put all the memories of people on Facebook, they tend to go there much more. But the monetization happens in the near future, what you're about to do. The monetization of the internet is about what you're about to do. I am hungry. Oh, you're about to eat. Let me offer you all these options. And so they decided to take it off. So I think there's part of our natural balance but are taken off by these software and technology because it doesn't monetize as well as they wish.
That's fair. And you talked about the elections a little bit without going into the political side too much. You referred back to the 2016 US elections a little bit where, social media really, especially with the fake news back in the day, it really impacted the election period. And I clearly recall we were running research studies in the US around 2016 during that time. And the factor of trust significantly dropped in the US back then when we did that. And that was really a turning point for social media platforms and the trust that consumers have in them. And last year, around this time, you will all recall that there was this image of Trump being dragged by the police on the streets, remember? And it became a trending topic. It was all over the internet, but it was fake. It was actually generated by Gen AI. So the question is, now that I'd like to call it the post-truth world, we're all in this post-truth world, how do you see it playing out in terms of, we talked about a little bit of the politics side, but now that we know these, I don't want to say lies, but it can be lies and it can get generated and scaled really quickly. What do you predict related to this?
So the intelligence agencies have a word, they call it high-fidelity propaganda, all these new things around using generative AI, so they already are putting it. But I would argue that we're not in a post-truth world anymore. I would refer to another a fantastic book from Philip K. Dick, The Man in the High Castle, that many of you have probably read, about a fictional alternative history, or it seems as an alternative history, when America lose the war to the Germans and the Japanese. But the true reality about this book is that we are in a world where America lives in a dual truth. So the two truths coexist at the same time. So if you look at the Trump world, they believe in what they believe. They have people on social media to reinforce that. They have some TV to reinforce that. And on the other side, you have what I would have called the real world, because I feel I'm more part of that world. And so it's not about fake news or post-truth. It's about two truths that cohabitate in the same place at the same time. And generative AI is just a new tool that make it even further. We had the same thing, by the way, with Macron during, during the time there was a lot of demonstration, and at the same time there was the trash collectors were on strike. So they had a photo of Macron on top of a trash being sad, and there were so many photos generated, and it was the crazy thing is one photo I recall was so interesting because nobody, including someone from AFP, the Agence France Presse, knew if it was actually a generated image or not, and it means that sometimes it can be.
That's the thing, yeah.
But I would argue that we live now in a dual truth, and with generative AI, we might live in a world where we're going to have millions of truth, like truth bubbles. You know, we had this echo chamber, and a truth bubble were just a small group of people with your best friend or e-girlfriend, that is the new AI stuff that you're gonna have on your phone. If you remember Her, the movie, will constantly reiterate that, and it's in the same way fascinating, but also a scary world ahead.
It definitely is on the scary side, but let's flip the coin a little bit so that we're not just stressing everyone out in the audience about all the potential negative impacts. I know that in your interviews you talk about technology can be a potential force of good. Is there anything that you're working on right now to, you know, boost that or to enforce that?
So this is a very interesting question. For the last decade, I really went to a very downside. I didn't believe technology was able to do anything good, and every time I was looking at how it works, mostly because of the fact that the leadership in technology is not only corrupted but morally, tainted. I think, we talk about radicalization in religion and many things, but I think what we live now is the radicalization of the golden era of sci-fi. You know, the Asimov, all the things about space adventure, all the things that are great now suddenly are being used as like a marketing pitch by Elon Musk, but other people, and they're selling a world where it sounds great, but if you look at it, you're not really in that world if you're an average person. So it's more an elite vision of the world, and but in some ways join all the sci-fi dystopian movies. But now I think that the technology, especially if we have the ability to harness the power of AI for a personal level, meaning if there's an ability with the open source movement to create technology that is not emotionally or controlled by the corporate world of AI, but you can fine-tune. And I think artists we were talking yesterday about the avant-garde. We actually are the avant-garde of that era, because that's what they need to do if you want to create. You need to basically train this AI to become I was going to say your pet or your partner or your creative a tool. And I hope that this technology will allow people as a person, each of us as a person, to access and tap into the potential of this. Because if we don't have that, then we have to rely on corporate and commercial AIs, and then I'm not so hopeful.
I think you connected it to exactly where I wanted to take us in the following part of the conversation, because I want to talk a little bit more about, AI's potential impact on the positive end for the art community. Today that we're at Noise Media Art Fair, of like how it can actually enhance and boost creativity. We're seeing amazing work of interplay between AI and the art world, and we're also seeing a lot of beautiful examples this week at Noise Media Art Fair as well, right? So I want to talk about, how you see or how you predict that interplay really enhancing creativity on the positive side a little bit.
So there's, as you know, there's two types of generative AI at the moment, but there's going to be more. And I think generative AI is at a moment where it's starting to change. One of the interesting thing is, the early AI I was talking about, the symbolic AI, the one where you had to basically structure what intelligence is now coming back, because we wonder sometimes if we let an insane model that has learned things, and we don't really know, because when ChatGPT came in, we said, oh, it's so much better than the version previously that was not great. And then people went back to the old version and started doing different prompts, and it was as good as the previous one. It means that it's like an alien technology. It came in and we don't know how to use it. But if we figure out a way to integrate rules and I wouldn't say ethics, because I might shock everyone here, but I think ethics of AI is BS. It's great as an idea, but it doesn't work. We might combine something interesting, but to go back to the positive side, I mean, in medical, in space, in new materials, in energy, there's incredible technologies where AI and potentially generative AI could be extremely interesting. But what I'm afraid of is that if Google is funding this company called DeepMind, who has incredible potential in science, and they're doing great stuff. But then they're a subsidiary of Google. We need to have independent companies, or better, public labs and publicly funded research as well to go in that direction, because I think there's a potential to you know, like post-antibiotic world where, you know, we're going to come to a point where antibiotics don't work as good and we need new medicine, and we know that only AI will allow us to do this. There's going to be so many things. And again, it's also about who control the model and how much you give people the ability to fine-tune this thing to fit their needs. And right now, we're in a moment where the most publicly known service, so ChatGPT, is a closed model, and you cannot really do anything with it. You can only tap for it for like what they call an API, and it's very limited. So if we unleash that tools, and I think artists are the first, again, to play with this, we will see a potential revolution. Is it going to be good or bad? I don't know, but it's definitely going to be a revolution.
And do you think there's going to be like a need for a balancing act from the artists to kind of protect their authenticity while working with AI? Because you highlighted some mid-journey examples on some of the creatives, right? And there are a lot of studies around the perceptions with art and artists that it can trigger later on in the long run. So I'm wondering what you feel about that balancing act.
It's a very interesting question, but it's also a very complex question. You know, there's a former case, Google Books, as many of you remember, where basically Google started like digitalizing all the books. And it was a very complex case. It's actually a case that is very close to what's happening right now with OpenAI and the New York Times. It's funny because all these cases happen to operate under American law. So at the end of the day, if you're in Europe or if you're in Asia, if you're in Africa and South America, you basically don't really have a say. But I would say what's very interesting is that since the case of Google Books, a lot of people thought, oh, we're going to do online books and they're going to kill the publishing industry. No, they'd use this technology to fine-tune and create Google Translate. And one of the fascinating thing about, the models is now to get to the next level, or GPT-5 and whatever will happen next, they're going to start using synthetic data and a massive use of them. But there's nothing better to train computers than, let's say, if you take Proust is, it's quite, it's been translated in every language in the world, I would imagine. I'm sure there's a Turkish version of À la recherche du temps perdu. There's a version of in every language. And all the people translated this, but has a great number of words of incredible sentence. It was a fantastic tool for a computer to train. So what I found fascinating is that when the AI trained, and same with graphics, if you take any artist that you like, it has such difference. And now, if you say we have to go on YouTube, that where half, or even worse, TikTok, where half of the generation of the videos are a copy of someone dance in a certain way, and then 1,000 people dance a certain way, nothing really changed. Someone has a red dress, everybody has a red dress. It's like this kind of copycat things forever. In terms of algorithmic value, if you say that the data is a pet food for an AI, this is very low quality pet food, and literature and art is a high quality, very rich nutrients food for them. So I believe artists should do whatever they can to not only protect themselves, because I believe also in the moral right for artists to protect their work, but also we need to make sure that the business model works well, because in this case, we also have the case of the music industry, where I was pro MP3. I love the idea of distribution. Mm-hmm. I was against DRM, the technology. I was against streaming platform because I think streaming platform are not giving any money back. And I am afraid that AI is going to be a little bit like a streaming model, because if they do a partnership as AI, I think OpenAI is doing a partnership with Bloomberg and with Axel Springer. And when you look at the model in details, it's peanuts, it's very little. So we need and I think countries need to protect also their cultural asset. I always keep talking when I discuss about France about the fact that culture is underfunded. And it's one of the biggest. We had this conversation earlier, Dominique. It's underfunded. In the meantime, it is a magnificent asset, and you need to be able protect not by saying you're not allowed to, but if you're harvesting our data, these are the rules we agree on. And I think it's a friction, but it's a necessary friction, because if not, everything will either be closed. Now all the websites are closing their data access, so nobody can do anything. So it only promotes the existing player like OpenAI, or people using synthetic data, and I don't know how good it is, but we will see, because the first synthetic models are coming out, and we'll see if it's as good as they claim to be. I'm not so sure. So yeah, I think the cultural part is essential. And in the meantime, every time we talk about it, we talk about AI for war. It's another big topic we might not start right now. We're talking about ethics, and we forget about the cultural impact and of absorbing the culture, and the impact on the global culture when it's absorbed and rehashed, as I was talking earlier, through this device. And this should be a core conversation we don't have yet, I think.
That's super interesting. And before I open it up to the audience for questions, I have one more follow-up on, again, the memory aspect, because I find it really interesting. There was actually a recent study about that, with AI's impact on memory and how you think. And for people, if you think about writing a prompt to ChatGPT and immediately getting your response, this study comes up with basically the con of how it can impact it, calling it basically the problem that if you have that quick responses, for people overall, but especially for students, in the long run, it can trigger for them to not dive into topics in depth anymore, kind of like staying at the surface level. And in the long run, also basically losing the power of their memory. So going back to all of our conversations that we had related to memory, but also knowing that AI is part of our life now, like it's not going away. What do you recommend to our audience today of keeping up while also not losing sight of still keeping with their human creativity?
I think I'm going to have a very short answer to that. It's a question I always have, and I don't have the answer. But in a world where everything that is difficult become easy, what is difficult? And I thrive when I go through a difficult thing. I think all of us, we like things because they're difficult. They're very easy, then. And suddenly, a massive part of our world, or at least perceive that, become or seems accessible and easy. And this is a question. It's an open question. I have no specific answer yet, but it's something I keep thinking about all the time.
It's probably a question that we all need to be thinking about. And that said, I want to open it up to our audience if you have any questions for Tariq.
Talk about the generative images of Trump, Macron, Erdogan, and every president has online, possibly now, more generated image of themselves than real images. So I'm not a transhumanist defender, usually. But finally, what do you think about the fact that you said that the machine learning second generation is very powerful because of the data sets that are larger. But these data sets nowadays are finally larger thanks to the generated image. This is what we call recursivity. So, kind of silly question. Do you think that we humans are not talking about disappearing from the planet, the surface of the planet? We're too many. But we're definitely too many online. And what do you think about the possibility that in the future, we finally might disappear, meaning real people, compared to generated? Do you know this person doesn't exist? You know this website. So there are many people that doesn't exist.
Are you familiar with, I love some internet conspiracy theories. Some of them are really funny. And there's the dead internet theory. I don't know if you're familiar with this one, but you should type it on the internet. It's about the idea that the world is not as active as we think. And most things that we see online or are basically generated, most of the text is like created. And when you type a thing and as a bot respond, and then a bots respond to it. That's called Twitter, by the way. And then there's another bots and another bots, and at the end, only the bots are talking, and you're like, can I, and you cannot even talk.
Can I chime in?
So this is, you're right, it's a very interesting question, but I also wonder, like, imagine the amount of space, the amount of energy, the amount of water, that we're using to store crap in this world. You know, we're talking about, you know, all the clothes we're wearing. You know, when you don't buy the clothes at H&M, or I shouldn't wear, like any of the fast fashion, they kind of throw them, I don't know where, you know, sometimes we found them in a country, there's like a ton of things. There's other places that have tons of electronics nobody wants. And, you know, they talked about us about how it's greatly recycled and whatever. But if you think about online, the digital pollution of, you know, all these things that are just taking space. I know that every time I talk about this to friends from Google, they say, but you know, now storing is cheap. I'm like, sure, but you're still storing crap at unprecedented levels every year. So, and when you think that we have a hard time funding archive.org, Wikipedia, you know, all this, and all the money goes to storing insane amount of content. You know, all the service we used back in the days, early social media. I'm sure a lot of you have used like things from 10 years and before, like Flickr, like all the things like MSN, the things we nobody use. And I know it's not a lot of content, but you know, this content is still there and nobody's using that, nobody access it. And we have this collection. So I also wonder, you know, what's, that gives me that thought when you're talking about this. Sorry about being too long.
Yeah, first, thanks a lot for the fascinating and very precise trajectory that you described. But sticking with the title, it's not very optimistic because we know that all the indigenous stories didn't end that well at some point. So they were completely, mostly destroyed and conquered. Shortly, what you exactly describe, it's all, there's an aspect of what you describe, which is the centralization. You kind of picked it up quickly, but I think that one of the major problems is that all these technologies, OpenAI first, beyond being closed, they are also centralized. What I mean is that you can use them only through the network. And at some point you mentioned something that I think it's very interesting, is what if Apple would allow us to have an AI on our own phone, which sounded like a personal AI on your own device, but we also know that Apple is not that generous, that the AI that would be here would be immediately backed up completely to their own servers because they use it to develop further software, etc. So I was wondering, with this indigenous thing in mind that there's in your title, and with this aspect, I'm not going into other quite threatening things, like one recent projection of having in 2026 90% of the content online being generated by these tools, which it's almost unbelievable at the moment. Do you think there are resistance practices towards this kind of colonization? And I mean both technical, like starting to have somebody's doing models of generating that are staying on your computer and not connected and are not feeding this big machine, or just social, like disconnecting from something and building something with the people you really trust and starting to have this kind of grassroots network that would be a kind of alternative to that?
First of all, what you said about decentralized and centralized, I think is obviously essential. And I would say that, at the moment I'm going in a phase where I'm going back for the history of technology. I've kept almost 40 years of, I was lucky to be online from my dad 40 years ago, like a modem and having access to this world. And at the time it was a very, I I wouldn't say the word civilized, but very, you know, well-organized world. You didn't call that, you used to call it data banks. You know, it was so like as the word banks, you know, for data, it just feels like, you know, it's a little bit upscale to what we have now. We have equivalent data centers, or it feels like a mall, a bit more than a bank. But one of the things is, so you're talking about resistance. I think one of the things when you go through the history of technology is we always foresee the technology world as a battle between, on one side, the US and Silicon Valley, and on the other side, China. You know, it's the duopoly we're using also in AI. So we always give about, you know, how much money is put in AI in America and in China, and then we talk about Europe and say, oh, you're so small and ridiculous. First of all, the budget related to AI is military. So you take the military budget of the US. So for give you an example, the cyber budget just for cyber of the US is bigger than the whole military budget of France, but it's not a small military country. So we're talking about amount of money that are basically invested for military, but it's very smart. The reason I say that is that as you know, because of the rules of the commerce, you're not supposed to, you know, especially in Europe where you're supposed to have like competition. I don't think it's always a good thing, especially in culture, but also in technology like that, you cannot promote your own technology. You have to be open, and then it means that the big tech companies usually take all the markets, except in case of national security. So the national security is also used as a pretext to fund directly what you want. And as a country, the idea of digital sovereignty, the idea that you control your infrastructure, technical stack is starting to raise. I've been pushing that in France for now a decade. It's not doing really well at the moment, but with COVID, when suddenly everybody's like, oh, we're entirely dependent on Google or Amazon to run the country. Because when everybody's at home, you need to call them to get your things. So that was a little thing. So maybe change. On the cultural level, it means that we should fund as well, not artists, but we should also fund infrastructure. And that's very important because now we think, oh, infrastructure, that's the work of Google and Facebook and OpenAI, so we don't need to do this. So suddenly, guess what? The only one who actually do things. Remember something, building software is not expensive. You know, building software is the least expensive thing in the world. You just need a table where you put a computer and you just need brain power. That's it. You don't need like, you know, it's like you answer like you do steel or I don't know what, you need the massive things. And the other thing that is fascinating is we see a return of, I don't know if you're familiar with the Fediverse. Fediverse is this alternative protocol that is used like Twitter-like. And guess what? It's coming back because everybody's tired of Twitter. And Facebook announced that Instagram Threads is going to use it. Jack Dorsey, former founder of Twitter, actually is going to use it. And there's going to be a lot of existing open source technology. And to go back to the point I was going to say earlier, but I didn't completely finish, is that between China and America, you also had a European culture. It was very predominant in the 80s. I grew up with, you know, the reading the Chaos Computer Club, Vo Hollande, the founder of Chaos Computer Club, and it was a visionary, political, humanistic vision about technology. It was very political, but very humanistic. Europe is what brought Linux to the world, IRC, the web, MP3, MPEG. Most of the core technologies, most of the early cloud technology were built in Europe by engineers, mostly open source. And they were dismissed at the time because the only thing that was interesting in Europe in '93 when the web came up, the number one priority was clean diesel. And we see where it brought us these days. So we never believed in our own engineers who were basically creating the bricks. So all the bricks were available for free, and then Google built on Linux. Alibaba built on Linux. OpenAI is built on Linux and models. Half of the people working there, including my former co-founder, are French, so and European. So in Europe, we had an incredible position. So did India, and at some point, so did many countries. And we forget, by forgetting of our history and, you know, the fact that every country had like, taking Italy, the first computer was actually made in Italy by Olivetti. People forget about it. It was destroyed by America because they didn't want to have a competitor to IBM. There's a great book about this, just about that story. And when you read about that story, you mean that it's also, technology is very political, and AI is an ideology. And going against what you said, resistance is not only a resistance to the technology, to the money, to the behaviors, to the people already converted to the existing model, it's also a resistance to the ideology. And for me, after looking at the same thing with climate change, artists are the only one that can make a difference. For me, I always talk about the COP in Paris. I don't remember anything about the COP, but I remember Elafor Eliasson came with a big piece of ice from Greenland, put it in front of the Pantheon, and every day it was melting. I was not even in Paris during that time. I was in Bali, and I heard about it, and that's the only thing I remember. And everyone I know, even people working at the COP, that's the only thing they remembered. And I wonder if, you know, a similar thing can happen in the technology space. At least I hope.
I'd like to build a little bit on Alessandro's question and some of the things that you mentioned about artists building their own models. And as an artist who's built his own models for very specific projects, I think, you know, there's a few things going on. There's an intentional blurring of certain terms by corporate America, let's say, or the corporations using AI. I think the ideas of models, AI in general, LLMs, it's all very confusing. I think that there's an education that needs to happen to the public so they greater understand like how these models are built, where the data sets are, how the data sets are created, where they come from, because this is public knowledge, right? I mean, this is open knowledge. It should be a common resource. And I think if artists are going to try to fight back to this, these kinds of corporate AI, the problem is we, you know, an individual, yeah, you can make software with your laptop and an idea, but you don't have the compute power. You know, you even talked about, I don't know how many H200s or whatever the chip is
350,000.
Yeah, that Meta has to crunch this billion-point hyperdimensional data set that's a massive piece of statistical analysis of images and text and how they fit together, you know? So how can the public wrestle that back? I mean, because it's also connected to climate change, right? I mean, the amount of energy we spend. Artists, of course, fought against blockchain and NFTs and all that. There was a big reaction to how that worked, but you know, there's as much compute power going into the training of these models, you know, and yet it's built on our data, you know, it's built on our knowledge, which should be public. So, and then the other question is, how do you get the legislation to understand this problem, right? Because I mean, we've all seen Zuckerberg talking to US senators who don't even understand how Facebook works, let alone these kinds of intentionally blurry lines between data sets, knowledge, models, and AI. Like, I mean, there's so many different types of AI and uses. It leaves me really in a very difficult position, you know, and it feels very powerless. And I don't have necessarily a question, but I wonder if you've seen inroads to maybe legislation or things like this to try to, you know, make it a more public kind of situation rather than owned by these corporations.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a joke, the most depressing thing about the Senate hearing is that a lot of senators came to him after a while. I said, "Oh, my grandkids want to do an internship."
Oh, no.
And
Horrific.
I don't know. Every time I'm in a place like here, like a noise, and I come and see art, I'm very hopeful. Every time I read TechCrunch, all these tech things, I feel depressed. So, I think one of the thing, because beside the fact that we didn't talk about, there's another medium I'm very fascinated about is movies, and we were having a conversation earlier about how movies are becoming models as well. Like you take a Star Wars, it's an LED screen, the entire world is designed on Unreal, it's owned by the corporation who makes the things, you digitize the actors, you may one day rehash the scripts. I don't know about this yet, but it might happen.
So yeah, it's happening.
But in the meantime, I found what's fascinating about the work you all do, and I think it feels magical. And it would be interesting to explain as well that, not that what you say is easy, because I don't think it's easy, but it's approachable, it's possible. And regarding the compute, I think governments are buying into supercomputers. In France, I know we have a massive supercomputers. In Finland, there's a supercomputer, and I personally believe that, I don't know if you remember, I don't know if it was for Hubble or for another satellite space telescope, they had given some tranche of time for students and PhD to actually, during that time when nobody's working, it's free for you to actually use this thing, is in space. And of course, it was overfilled right away. But the idea, that you could have public service time for artists to actually access, like this is, because there's a French thing called Jean Zay. It's not as big as Tesla, but there's a wall of chips. But it should be available. I think it should be mandatory that we should push governments to actually give access to the means of computations, as we call them, if I was using a Marxist term, and equal access to means of computation. And I think it is something we should talk about. Regarding the legislation, I am very conflicted because I personally don't think we should regulate what we don't understand yet. And in the meantime, I believe we should protect, especially the most vulnerable people, by the effect of AI. But a lot of the things, the abuse that exists right now, are not related specifically to AI, related to social media. They're related to the idea that if you're a company who's running a big social media, it means that you have 1 billion people. How do you organize or regulate 1 billion people? There's even countries like China, we don't even know how to do that, or India now. How would you, with like a few people you pay in the Philippines or I don't know where, to do moderation, figure it out? So there's another problem with going back to what you said about centralization. It's too big. And to be very honest, knowing a lot of people at Facebook, they wouldn't say that publicly, but I can, because I have no, some of them say it's exactly like AI. Sometimes we don't know this happened. It's not like they want this thing to happen. They're like, we learned it through the press. Because it's so big. How can you pretend, you pretend to the advertisers you have all the tools, everything works great, and then something happened, and then the police comes to you or the government comes to you, and they're like, sometimes it's not true, but sometimes it's actually true. We have no clue. So it's kind of a, Frankenstein model that we're building, and we're thinking everything's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be fine, but maybe not. So, but going back to what you said earlier, I really believe that we should aim for public access to high level of computation, especially now that you're right, to do next gen of art needs next gen of computing power. And I know now with the new models from Mistral, you can run it on your M3 Mac, but if you could have access to a bigger thing, I would love to see what any of you would do with such computation access.
Okay, maybe go on. Last question, after that.
Yes, we'll wrap up.
Because there is another conference by Alessandro.
Perfect. So this is the last question, and then we'll wrap up after that.
So sorry then.
No, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, as you were speaking and you were talking about truth and you were talking about memory, just to sort of take it to the world of ideas from some of the sort of tactical legislative issues, I started, you said that truth and memory are going to be the next sort of things we lose. And I was struck by that because I was thinking about the fact that after the 2 world wars, there was this rather important literary movement in theater of the absurd. And Martin Esslin wrote about that movement over the period after World War II, describing it as these playwrights who had nothing to do with each other, they were in very different places and didn't necessarily know each other, were responding to the meaningless meaning-making of authorities and the loss that had happened during that period, that they couldn't trust the authorities. There was the loss of empires, what Lyotard eventually talked about in terms of the loss of meta-narratives. We've been dealing with the loss of truth for almost a century. And we know that memory is fallible. It's one of the reasons it's not a, there's all sorts of issues around it being presented as evidence in courts and so forth, right? And so with all that being said, I find it puzzling sometimes that what initially gets attacked about this, what we're calling these sort of AI technologies, is truth. Because it seems weird that we're trying to pin it on a system where we already are experiencing socially, politically, humanistically this loss. And so I wanted to ask, and just off the top of your head, if we take truth off the table as the problem of AI, what is it that truth is obscuring for us as the actual problem we're facing?
Very briefly, it's a fascinating,
fundamental question.
It's a fundamental question, but also there's one thing I noticed about AI. We can see I don't know if any of you have been in a self-driving car. It's kind of a fascinating experience. It used to be a fascinating experience. Now I wouldn't recommend, because apparently when there's no driver and you take a car late night after a club, some weird thing happens in the car. They didn't think about it initially when they built it. But when you talk to people who build this, they were talking about how we will never accept from a car accidents that most humans would do. And in some ways, I think regarding the truth, regarding many things that generative AI is building, we're not willing to accept that a lower standard. We even put AI on a higher standard of, because we also, and I don't know if it's because of the popular culture and from sci-fi and other things, but I remember being a kid, the computer was the thing that had all the answers. It was the machine you would ask, and it has all the answers, and it was designed to be that. Now we know, thanks to Kubrick, that the machine can lie to us. It was a very big change and probably haunted us. But to go back to the idea of memory, and we're happy to discuss more about this, has anyone here lived, everyone here I would imagine has lived in the world before the internet and has seen in his own eye the world before the internet and online. And I wonder what will happen, I don't know how long from now, when the last person who has seen the world before the internet disappear. Because when you talk about memory in Second World War, I think the reason we had such, well, there was the Cold War, of course, and there was many things, but the reason of, peace in Europe was also built on the fact that a lot of people had this collective memory of like, never again. And maybe we're back in the situation we're right now because, less and less people have that kind of memory. And I wonder if we are not the custodial garden of truth in a way, and of a truth of a world that exists physically because we can touch it. Imagining it is not a simulation, of course. And what happened if the last person on Earth has disappeared? So what happens? And I'm always another question I'm fascinated about.
All right, awesome. Well, Tariq, thank you so much for being with us today. We very much appreciate your presentation and your answers. And I would like to also thank the audience that was with us today. Thank you so much for being so engaging with your interactive questions. That's all for today.